Thank you, Nikki. Call the City Council work session to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Person Vining.
She's excused.
Germani.
Here.
Present.
Whitman. Iko Angeli.
Present.
Clark.
Present. Work session, and we have some items that are to be covered in the time frame we have. Mr. Sell, our Assistant City Manager. I know that Mr. Lewis will be doing presentation. If you do, start for me, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Patrick, if you could step up and introduce our first presenter.
Certainly. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. Patrick Lewis, Director of Engineering and Public Services, and I guess I'm navigating tonight. So our first work session topic we'd like to present to you tonight, I'm going to introduce Mark Russell of Russell Design. He has been sort of our standing landscape architect on a number of city projects, most recently, and as the Labor Park project is sort of the signature one here in the city. And we're looking at the Father Carnes Park conceptual plan. He's been helping us out with that. What we're hoping to leave here tonight with is, after showing you the information that we've got, ask for your consideration at a future meeting to proceed with the design phase of this, as we do wish to engage Russell in construction management, design, and bidding assistance. Certainly it'll be bid through the city like the Labor Park project was, but we want to make sure we've got that technical assistance from Russell. We did have a, I don't want to call it a steering committee, but we did engage Parks and Recreation Director Loretta LaPointe, myself, and Vince Pastu with Mr. Russell. We walked the site, had some further discussions about the layout of some elements, and so Mr. Russell is going to present to you what those are. The other item, so don't forget at the end here, that we did want to discuss too, is consider the idea with this project, as we've done with some other large-scale important community projects, of in the future setting up kind of an ad hoc steering committee for this. So that'll be something, again, that along with the design contract consideration will come to you for future action at a future meeting. So I'm going to turn this portion of it over to Mr. Russell, and he'll steer you through a discussion on the current conceptual master plan. So, Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you, Patrick. Mark Russell with Russell Design, 114 Racine Street, Northville, Michigan. So I'm here to seek advice and direction from you folks. And by no means is this an effort toward negating or ignoring a current master plan that was approved, I believe, in 2017. I may be mistaken on that year, but I believe it was 2017. And this also contemplates the conversation that we had on site, as Patrick had mentioned. Some things have changed from the current master plan that I wanted to review with you folks. The plan is I guess before you folks. At the top of the page is the 8th Street. Rosler is to the left, Union Street to the right, and then the industrial development to the south of the site, where the current baseball field is located, the lighted baseball field, I should say. So some of the conversation that we had on site, and most importantly, was sort of a directive from Patrick Lewis and discussion with Vince Pastu also, about locating the driveway to the park on city property versus on township property. The current master plan locates the drive in approximately this location, which is on township property. The city property line is basically from the center line of 8th Street, south on Rosler, and south on Union Street, approximately 292 feet. 92 feet? 94, excuse me, 94 feet. Essentially, where you see this crosswalk here, that is approximately the location, because the sidewalk ends at that location on the east side of Union Street and that contemplates the property or the city property limits. So what we've done there is located the driveway here, or proposing to locate the driveway here, north of where it was previously proposed, but south of a couple of guy wires and telephone poles that we have located that are coming out of the substation, which is located in this location here. So there's a guy wire, and you can maybe see a dotted line, what have you, on there, and guy wires and telephone poles. And that's why this sidewalk takes a little bit of a hitch to circulate around that telephone pole, and then also the guy wires that are represented right there. So that's, rather than moving poles and moving guy wires, I think we may have to change this guy wire into something called a pedestrian guy to accommodate pedestrian circulation north and south on Rosler. The parking lot here is 60 parking spaces. The current master plan has 58, proposes 58 spaces. Also, the difference with what we have on the previous master plan is that the parking lot was angular, or took an angle, I guess, if you will, into the park that penetrated more to the center of the park. By locating the driveway closer to the north end of or just adjacent to the substation, we felt it was better to have that parking lot parallel with Rosler to accommodate as much space as possible for future development. The current master plan locates the playground here and the splash pad in approximately the same location that we're proposing it on this plan, albeit that we have probably a little bit larger of a footprint than what's presented on the current master plan. But we can certainly work with Loretta and her team, and not only on the location, but the actual size, but the actual configuration and amenity. As you all recall, I think Councilman Ike Galangeli mentioned that we should have a water feature at Labor Park, and that's exactly what we did, is located more of a, we'll call it a fountain versus a splash pad. So we don't have any toys and doodads sticking up in the air. We have the water coming from the ground. Not that we're contemplating doing that in this particular park. We'll work with Loretta and her team to develop exactly what that wants to become. Also, in that master plan was a restroom, which we're using this space here as a restroom slash covered pavilion slash storage area. And it's located in this location not only to make room for the splash pad to the north, but also there's a little bit of a notch in the property line and the existing sanitary service that terminates from the park or from the alleyway to the north and crossing 8th Street terminates in about this location. So we're in pretty close proximity to not only servicing the splash pad, but also the restrooms from a sanitary sewer standpoint, excuse me. The area to the south of the restroom building is another area. It's approximately 80-foot diameter, give or take, because we're kind of chopping off the nose of that on both locations, actually. And this would be the location of a playground. And in a similar size and age group of 2 years to 5-year-olds that they had proposed in the previous master plan. A couple of changes not only the changes I've just described, but one of the things in locating the splash pad, I think further to the south, was that it gets it away from this corner. And this corner has, if you've all visited the site, it has a series of telephone poles that exit the substation, come over here to Union Street, and then head south on Union Street. So we thought it best to leave that as an open space, and rather than having children play environments beneath those utility service poles, not only from a potentially safety standpoint, but also from accessibility to the utilities via the utility company, and not being able or not having to work around or negotiate around any play equipment, utilities, what have you. The area to the south, these 4 courts are pickleball courts and a center pavilion shade structure. We've talked a little bit with some consultants that we have used in the past, and they highly recommend having a shade structure within that court area for just that, to serve people waiting to play or people providing shade in between play. This is 4 courts. The previous master plan was 8. And we can certainly fit 8, but it's going to jeopardize some of the things happening to the south. One of the larger omissions, if you will, for lack of better words, is the tennis courts, the 3 tennis courts. And that may have been a miscommunication on my part, and I apologize for that, and I've already apologized to Loretta and the team. It was my understanding that the tennis courts would be relocated or located and reconstructed and relocated at Munson Park. But I guess I was misunderstood that conversation. We do have 2 sand volleyball courts with a little larger area just for errant balls and while playing playing volleyball. The one thing I failed to mention, the bocce ball court, sorry, not the bocce ball, the pickleball courts will be lighted. And the lighting will be served from the previous electrical feed, which is about in this location, for that service the lights for the ball field that's there currently. So we're going to repurpose that and direct that toward the lighting of the pickleball courts. The contours, you can see there's some screening of the parking lot to the south and screening of the bocce ball courts from the west to give more of an environment, more of a welcoming environment, and certainly buffering the industrial building to the south to make this feel like it's more of an outdoor room and more park-like than what it is currently, where this view bleeds off, and actually it appears as though some of the uses to the south of us are also on the city property. So we would have to work with that property owner as well to justify that line. And we haven't done a survey. We're just going by information that Patrick has provided from his GIS team. So we would certainly, before beginning any level of construction details or drawings, that we would want to have a full topographic and boundary survey so that we're comfortable with the limits of work. One of the things, the substation, and both in the master plan and in the plan you see before you, provide a buffering of the substation. We're a little bit more literal with that on all 4 sides versus the south and the east sides as shown on the current master plan. I think I've touched on just about all of the existing, or pardon me, all of the features that are on the previous master plan and features that are not shown on this plan that were on the previous master plan. And I'm here certainly to answer any questions.
Okay, so we had in our packets not only the information and the rendering of this, but also the one that was handed out here today from 2017 was there. But this makes it easier looking at them both at the same time. Thank you, Councilman. So I'll see if there's any questions offhand to start.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Andrew?
Was there an intention to retain a splash pad or some sort of water feature at this park as well? My understanding previously was that there was a decision to be made on we were going to do a water feature, and then there was discussion of where we were going to put it. I wasn't under the understanding that we were going to do multiple. I know it's a higher cost item.
Right. I recall in the conversation when we started with Labor Park, obviously to add that and through the council, but from one area of our community, the other, the youth and students, just notice that's down, was to add a water feature in this from the onset, as I recall. But okay. But I know as we talk through that, is if we're putting one in one location, trying to serve both portions of our community in that area. I know that other plans within the other parks have that as well, I think, in a couple areas, but I think this was one that we said we were going to, as I recall, so. Okay, Brian, and I'll just work my way down.
Yeah, thank you. I know we took the tennis courts off of here, and our intentions are to, with the master plan, to get rid of them at St. Mary's Park as well. Do we have a plan to put tennis courts back in somewhere, or are we just going to get rid of them altogether?
I think I will defer to Loretta, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Loretta LaPointe, Director of Parks and Rec. One of the goals, Brian, that's an excellent point, is you look around at what's aging, instead of trying to diminish or take some out. The part of the goal, and that's why I think we did the big plans and put them all together in one, was so that you could see if something wasn't here, it was here, so that there was a future and not a gap. So when I look even at Soldiers and Sailors, I'm concerned that's really aging, but has no parking at all. And that was one of the gains when we were going to put it all at this park. So I would feel good too if it were at this park with the parking. I know with pickleball as well, we've got 3 already at Manor, and people are waiting to get on. So I'm concerned with taking it down to 4. I would like to see back in the plans the tennis and the original number of pickleball. With aging seniors and pickleball is really popular, we won't be able to service them all with 4. And Manor will have to, again, Manor Park was one of the parks in the original, and as you're taking them out of there, then we could put all 8 here, because we're in dire need. There are people just lined up.
Just a question. Is it possible to do both, to service both with one court? Can you do pickleball and tennis at the same court?
I think that they would be
They definitely have to be
competing
separated.
people wanting to be on them. A lot of people
Dedicated
are
to one or the
playing.
other.
Yeah, people are playing. The schools use them. People come out, they want to play pickleball and tennis at the same time. And I think part of the pickleball is to make it for the seniors so that it's just right for what they're going to need, and they can all play there. With that, when we had that, I started a free program on Tuesday nights where we would just teach you to play pickleball. So we had pickleball, we bought the rackets, we had the rules, and we had people there, and it just mushroomed quickly, a lot of people. And they weren't happy thinking it would come out of Manor, but that is a very old tennis court that is in dire need of being transferred to this. And, it became more than a sport for that. It became their social evening, and nobody doesn't want to come. They wanted to come, to the point where when I wanted to switch it, they were upset, thinking that I meant I would take that. I said, no, you can keep Tuesday night. We'll put that on another night if we do something else. So I would like to see all 8 just to serve. Well, they'd probably be waiting with 8, I'm going to be honest, when you have only 4 people playing. So yeah, it would be good. They could share the parking lot. I know that Soldiers and Sailors is also going to be part of the bike path, the heritage. And that might be nice to have more room there, because that's where the path is, exactly where the path is going to be coming to try to weave back. Might be nicer to have some rest areas there, or, other things that would lend itself to that. And I don't, I wouldn't want to take anything out until something's already in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, Your Honor, I'll give you a little, give the council a context of the master plan in 2017. That's why I printed them off for you. Was the initial concept that Loretta said as part of the strategy for the parks was to really create this as the court park for the city. So we'd have, volleyball, the bocce ball courts, tennis courts, the pickleball courts, and also have enough courts that you could have league play here. So people aren't playing at different facilities. They could, have a pickleball league, tennis league. If the schools want to use it, you've got 3 tennis courts. You have parking that's accessible, bathrooms. Each of the park plans went through 2 community engagement sessions plus an open house. And the comments for this park at Carnes with the neighborhood was that they wanted the playground and the splash pad pulled close to the corner so they could see the kids. They didn't want the kids wandering into the park. That's kind of the historical area of Carnesfield when it used to have the wading pool. The wading pool is at the corner along with the playground. And, you know, you have the houses around the corner, so that's kind of like eyes on the park. And so the neighbors that showed up that were interested in this, you know, that were moms that had kids, would rather have the playground and the splash pad closer to the neighborhood and then use the balance of the park for the community facilities. The task that we gave the consultant in designing this was to maximize the property. And that's why everything is on a diagonal. Because if you bring the parking lot in as designed in the master plan, you've got enough space for the tennis courts, the pickleball, the volleyball, and the bocce court in different activity zones. So there was a rationale for that design. I understand that you want the curb cut on the city limits, but I don't have a problem personally with a curb cut that's on the county portion of South Rossler. I mean, it's a road. It's just under county jurisdiction. You know, big deal. But that was some of the rationale behind this. And so when I looked at the plan that Mark and the administrative group came up with, I thought it just didn't maximize or utilize the amount of property that we have over here that was originally intended by the Parks and Rec Commission and by the community engagement sessions. So I would rather gravitate back to the original concept with some refinement rather than reorganizing the park under the proposed concept. That's my comment, Your Honor.
Paula, any comments? I have a couple.
No, I think that, not that I play pickleball, but, you know, that's what the rage is right now, and I believe we should have 8 courts.
So just a couple thoughts. I know since 2017, the one thing that probably changed the most of the park is that far northern section where the power station, they put the new poles, and I'm not sure all the logistics that are there, and I'm sure that's being considered. And I am not opposed to using the space that was originally designed. I think about that. I'd have to go back out and look at the poles and look at the elements of where they are, but I'll make sure that we don't have any conflict there for obvious reasons. I think the splash pad is a feature that's going to be utilized. When I look at that part of our community that's now kind of returned in the growth of youth around the area, and that's going to be beneficial. But then it also brings the other portion of our community that access pickleball. You know, there's no question that the pickleball is taking off, and there's a lot, as Loretta said, there's a lot of requests for it. We would want to try to maximize the space. I agree. The tennis courts, I think, is going to be a long-term conversation because, you know, we have them at Soldiers and Sailors, as Loretta said, and we know that the long-term there might change. St. Mary's, we have a couple courts there, and there's plans long-term for that as well. But I listened to the city manager when we come up with these. One of the items that was most probably brought up was frequently was the tennis courts at St. Mary's for reasons that people that are nearby there that are utilizing. In this, the bocce ball court, I was over the past few months, people are talking. I understand now that shuffleboard is getting a significant return, and there's teams and tournaments across the state. I know we have a couple of those courts there in St. Mary's that really aren't being utilized, and eventually we'll get to where we have an opportunity to kind of make that revitalize that too, whether it's bocce or shuffleboard. And I'm trying to think on the original plan on the bocce ball courts, unless Loretta can tell me that there's people that are calling and asking when we're going to put them back in somewhere. I don't know if you're getting calls on the shuffleboard, but it was interesting. I did not aware there's a couple of people in town that they're rated like other activities, and somebody's near being rated expert or whatever that might be. But they go as far as Bay City for tournaments they have up there, and it's a big to do. So I think we keep mindful of how that changes. Maybe that's something that might adjust from the original to what we're looking at was presented today. I like the configuration with the play area and the water feature. If it could be shifted, that the space could use safely that's open. I'm not opposed to that. Trying to maximize the space, I think, is important. I think the tennis courts will be the conversation we continue to have as we look at the parks and how do we make that fit with the other court needs of pickleball and even sand volleyball is coming. You know, we have it at Munson Park, but others are looking for that as well. So it's just kind of my thought. I look at what was we had back in 17, what's presented today. I think there's still some of the same amenities. Are we maximizing the opportunity is kind of what I'm saying as well. Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
And I'm
Yep,
I'm
well, I just
mindful
thought
of
on
our
behalf
time
of-
of all the items we have on the agenda.
Yes, that's correct. On behalf of the city manager, I just wanted to kind of wrap this up here. So what I'm hearing from the council consensus is we still have a little more work to do as far as configuring the uses, making some, I'll call them conceptual layout changes. Are we comfortable moving forward with some type of a steering committee to take it from this point and start to do that? Is that something that
I
you're
think we
interested
want to
in?
move forward. I think the time is of the essence because we obviously are looking forward to what we get finished in our design here in the fall because our capital improvements come up next year, and this is the park that we've selected. It'll be the next one completed. So if that is an item of the manager reaching out to see who might be interested in wanting to sit in working through those details, I think absolutely we should move forward. That's my thought. I'm looking to council. I think otherwise.
Well, Your Honor, why not, instead of, steering committee, we already have the Parks Recreation Advisory Committee. They worked on this. Why not use them as a sounding board, working with Mr. Russell on refining the plan?
Yeah, I know that our Recreation Commission is kind of, I won't say defunct. I just don't know, we haven't had appointments and renewals. There's some people that were there that I obviously know they're not moving forward. It might be members of that previous committee that would want to step in and help out with some contacts we could make. I'm open to that.
No, they haven't met in a while, primarily because of COVID, and we're not programming, and they were very active in preparing all the master plans. I would think that if they had an opportunity to get re-engaged, I'm sure we could find a couple of people on that committee that would be more than happy to
Sit in.
to work with the administration.
How about if I meet with Loretta and we can kind of go over those members that are there and think that there were, I guess, most active toward the kind of the terms before they stopped meeting, and maybe we'll get a couple of people there. And of course, we have the applications for the Trails Committee that we need to finalize as well. I think they're going to have some roles here in some of the, not only the topics that are on tonight, but getting ready for capital improvements. There might be a person or two there that have put new applications that they're interested in, not only trails, but recreation, and trying to bring that in as well. Unless there's other thoughts from council members?
I guess my last thought would be that I would like as Mark refines the design, to kind of use the 2017 master plan as a footprint to kind of refine the design and maximize the utilization of the park so we have room in the future for the tennis courts. And if we wanted to add 2 more sets of pickleball courts, we had the ability to do it. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Okay. It sounds like there's maybe some more discussion to come here. I'll report back to the city manager what we discussed, and that I don't know that we're walking out of here with any firm direction, but I think our goal was to push this forward for 2022 construction. So I think we want to keep.
That's an affirmative I hear from
Yeah, that's an
council, for
affirmative.
sure.
I believe that to be correct. So we will continue pushing this, and so I'm sure he'll be in discussion with you.
We can get with city manager and Loretta and just work out something, how we put a group together, and then get back and report that to council.
One last question. This is primarily for maybe Patrick or Mark.
Sure.
Mark, on your services that you provide the city, do you also provide the construction administration?
We do. We
You-
can.
You can.
That was our intention.
Okay. Yeah.
Our intention is to,
Design the construction documents, assist the city with bidding, do the construction administration.
Absolutely.
to answer your question, Russell Design will be overseeing the irrigation system for Carnes
Well,
Park,
I'm just, no,
as well as some of the
I
other
want,
elements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mark knows where I'm going. Typically,
Continuous.
on a park project, the LA handles it from design all the way through construction.
That's why we want to make sure we've got this refined and get numbers to the council for the CIP that reflect the actual cost of doing all that. Because that was one thing in the Labor Park project that did get a little out of hand there, as we were scrapping to get to the budget number there. So we will make sure that occurs, and that was our intention. The bidding assistance, construction administration on the site, and they're prepared to engage AEW engineers as necessary for some of the civil side, because my group internally will be busy with next year's
Well, that was my
routine
concern,
infrastructure.
based on the number of projects you have on your plate, was pushing more of this. And having Mark's group coordinate the whole project.
That is our intention as well as I believe his.
And then simultaneously to that, we'll be engaging subconsultants from a design, through the design phase, through construction administration.
Okay, great.
So everyone on our team will be involved throughout the project.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Your Honor.
All righty. Your Honor, I'm going to move on to the next item, which is mine. So that was the review of the St. Mary's Gardens project update. I'm going to skip through this as fast as I can here, but I also want to just give you an update on where we are.
All right, thank you, Loretta.
All right. You've seen the background before, but basically it's the same as it's been. It's built in the 60s. The land runs the opposite direction from the storm sewers, which gives us at the bottom end, the south end of the subdivision, not a lot of relief to go to Mason Run. So we've had a number of, I'll say, street flooding incidents there, and the most recent of that was July of 2021. So the end of the month there, we had some flooding in that. Again, subsided fairly quickly, but when you've got that pressure on the entire system, and I'll get into that in a minute with some of your clear water discharges that are putting pressure on the sanitary system. Here's some of our challenges that we have here. Obviously, I've shown you these pictures before, and I won't go over all these line for line, but basically, some streets don't have storm sewer. Most have undersized storm sewers. This is a picture of the last runs into Mason Run. The pipe's actually notched in, and it's backwards. So you've got it runs uphill for a foot to get out. The biggest thing I want to impress upon you is what we've already said, but just as a refresher, is what you get a lot of is you've got, because there are not adequate storm sewers and not any in some places, you actually have that circular where the sump pumps are running, picking up water from the perimeter tiles, pumping it, but they're going into the sanitary sewer, which then backs up the floor drains, and you just end up pumping everything in a circle and filling up everyone's basements. So the first step is providing an adequate storm system, and then moving on to creating those footing drain disconnects, footing, roof drain, sump pump disconnects, routing those to their proper place. So going back to where we are right now, obviously we've talked about this before as well, and that's the sanitary service area. Wastewater is operating under a corrective action plan, and that's the main thrust of that's actually going to be lining the mainline 18-inch sewer under the Mason Run drain that feeds this area, or I should say serves this area. We're finding, we've got a rough estimate of somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the homes in this area have some kind of clear water connected to that sanitary sewer. And this is the large scale area. I'm going to try to get my cursor on here. Maybe I can't find it. Yeah, you can't see that. Sorry about that. The north end of this, basically Hendricks Drive, is kind of in the middle of that purple boxed area. That's the road that runs east and west. We're talking about a project going north of there, and that's where the bulk of the issues are. So in conjunction with this project, we need to implement a footing drain disconnection program. Again, get those clear water out of there. You've seen this graphic before. I won't belabor this. I'll come back to it if anybody wants to see it, but this is basically what you have when you put in a sump pump with a check valve and then route it to the proper place. In the interest of time, I'll keep on moving. So where we are right now in the process is, and I'll show you on the map here in a minute, Spicer Group of Dundee has been the engineer on this project, obviously in coordination with our team, Chris Schaefer and myself at the city, as well as Mr. Leroy from his standpoint. So we're talking about the project area north of Hendricks. We're upgrading storm sewer lines to larger diameters, adding branch lines, deepening the whole system. When we deepen the system to get the flow into the last run into Mason Run, we have to put in a pump station. That's been the concern. If we're going to do this, we need to do this right, and that's put these in. I had a set of plans that didn't come out very well on the screen here. That actually shows you in a lot of areas we're having to deepen 5-6 feet to get the flow we need, the proper slopes coming out of the southern end of this. So we're talking about a fairly significant cost there, and that would be some type of detention pond and a wet well pump station actually in the former Calgary Park property, which right now is not an active park. That's the only property that works that we control at this point. And then, as we mentioned before, every home in this area would have its own residential tap, and then that's when we could do the clear water discharge disconnection. And at the end of the project, we're going to rebuild every street in the area. So everything that's touched as part of this, and I list the 5 roadways up there. Lavender, again, north of Hendricks, Rosler north of Hendricks, John L. the full length, Calgary the full length, and McCormick the full length. All of those are in fairly poor condition now. So we're not tearing up good streets here. So obviously that's bumping up the cost of the overall project, but we do have other sources now that we didn't have before. The map up here shows, this was the, I'll say an overview from Spicer Group, and we met on Friday, and we're going to be meeting again this Friday. The teal line there is Mason Run Drain. That's obviously the outlet. The blue lines are the only storm sewers in the area that are going to be left at their present configuration. And that's because the red lines are new lines. Those are going to be larger diameter sewers. And then the yellow are, we're upgrading those. So those are going to be deeper and larger diameter. And you'll see at the kind of the upper left corner there, there's a little white box, Calgary Park, and that's where the pump station will be. So we're actually intercepting those two last runs at Rosler and Lavender that would go to Mason Run, where they go uphill. We're going to intercept those along Calgary and take those to a pump station. It seems counterintuitive because we're going west to go into a drain that flows back east. But again, that was the only realistic option using property that we controlled. So that's what the preliminary design looks like. And our expected costs and funding here. And this is, I know the city manager has discussed with you some funding options for this before. We had originally were looking at this as having to fund the street projects through a bond. Fortunately, with the ARPA funds that we do have available, city manager is recommending that we fund the majority of this project using those funds because this entire project is eligible. And because the streets are being torn up for the storm sewers, those are also eligible costs. So I mentioned exact costs still being determined in final design. And when you get to a project this size, you've got a fair amount of contingency in there too. And we frankly haven't done a project of this size and magnitude of storm sewer work in the past. We've got two local contractors that have both expressed an interest in doing this project for next year. They're busy on the schedule, obviously, for this year. So I'm confident we'll get good bids. But as for now, we want to report out what our engineer's estimate costs are. Range of costs about $4.5 to $5 million, and that's within the realm of what city managers presented you before. We've got detention pond and pump station costs of up to $1 million. We're still a hair under that. Storm sewer, the main lines are about 1.2. Roadway reconstruction, as I mentioned, was about 2.3. And we've still got to determine the exact method we're going to do the house taps, remaining detailed design costs, because we still have a proposal we have to bring to you on that. And then any permitting costs. Unfortunately, we are going to be dealing with Eagle and the Monroe County Drain Commissioner's Office. The former is a lot more difficult than the latter. I don't anticipate any problems with the latter, but hopefully Eagle will not give us too much trouble on the permitting there. So we think those are all going to fall under that $500,000 mark. So that's what comes up with the upper end number of about $5 million. I list some eligible funding sources there. Obviously, the ARPA funds are what we had talked about as the primary source. You could use some or all of these in other proportions as well. The street millage is eligible. Technically, I suppose the storm sewer system is related to the streets, but I would not fund that out of that. General Act 51 allocation, general funds, special assessment district, although that is an interesting animal if you were to try to spread a project this size. And then the wastewater fund, we've already got identified for targeted items, and that would be like I'll say the last aspects of this, the footing, drain, sump pump, roof lead disconnections. So a lot of the interior plumbing work to connect to our new taps that we'll put onto the new storm sewer system. We had always contemplated that the wastewater fund would put in some dollars into that as well. So as before, we recommend the vast majority of the funding, probably $4 to $4.5 million, come from the ARPA funds, which in turn frees up other sources for more flexible city use. So I have a next step in timing on here. As I mentioned, we're meeting again to start going over the nitty-gritty details on the 10th. Spicer is going to proceed to detailed design and contract prep, and they're going to get me a proposal for their remaining tasks. They got us to concept, included all the survey information on that, and that was like a $90,000 award for that. Finishing the bid plans and things like that are the next phase. We expect that we should be able to, barring regulatory agency concerns, have the bid package ready by the end of the year, throw that out for bids, and start of construction as early as March 2022. We do believe it could be a one-season project, although you'll have to stage it because we cannot tear up every street in that whole area simultaneously. So it'll be a long project, but we think it can be done in 1 year. So that is the presentation on that, an update. So we're really the only thing we're looking for from you is just give you an idea of where we are and let you know that we have an additional proposal that's going to be coming your way from the Spicer Group here in short order.
I have a couple things, and then I'll see if there's other questions, and Mr. Sell may have a follow-up regarding, kind of where our next steps as well on the funding side too. But just dawned on me is that we've talked about this as a council for quite a while now. We understand the urgency to it and why it's one of our priority projects moving forward. We've put some funding aside. And the first thing, of course, council, is that we want to proceed as soon as possible, just as the timeline that Patrick stated, but also if there's any concerns regarding the funding aspects we talked about with the ARPA funds. But my question was, when I saw the little white box there, just, I don't need details, but when you talk about a pump station, because I'm sure the residents will think about that, give me an idea what that looks like. I mean, dimension, size, height, stuff like that.
They're still sizing it, but it'd basically be like a fairly decent sized manhole.
okay.
Water would get into it from the surrounding detention pond, and then you'd have an outflow pipe that would basically have a pump in it, and then when water got to a certain level, it'd kick it out and go into the drain.
So structurally, I think
It's not gonna be a building.
9 by 12 building or something like that.
Not gonna be a
6
building.
by 6. Okay.
Portions of it may be above ground a little bit, but it's
Right.
not going to be a building.
It's visible, but it's not something that's a significant structure.
What about backup generator?
I believe it will have that installed. Again, that's sort of the last piece that they're still working on. I have not seen the plans on that one, but it hasn't come up, but my intention was that we would probably have that in there because that's a pretty big issue.
Yeah, Councilman,
Unless we're going
that's
to
a great
size the
point.
pond so huge that it would handle a huge event, but I don't think that's our intention.
And I back that up too, because the last weather outing we had suggests that we need it. Not we think about it, we need it.
Yeah, I think some of the storms and some of the other things that just see around our community, and I think the community came together, and we're going to talk about that next, but
Yep.
on the storm, but it just, those opportunities that present themselves for some was beneficial, even for others as they helped each other. So I know that it was even in my neighborhood as well.
We can certainly make sure that is included in the design. That was my intention as well with something like this, because we don't want to put an entire neighborhood at risk like that. I know
Right.
Elm Avenue at Telegraph, when the power goes out, we had a problem with that. The issue there is really space. I mean, we have to be some major retrofitting to try to figure out how to work that in there, but.
We know what our issues are there now. We know what we want to rectify, and then to make it so it's not functional, then with simply being a generator would be beneficial. I'm going to go to Mr. Sell. I know that Patrick touched on it when and what's being presented by the administration. And the manager is using the ARPA funds, but then that also allows funds that we've kind of thought we were dedicating, and we're there that what that might mean and what that from your side, I think where those what that might be and where it goes, I guess.
Yeah, I would, just start off by saying that the ARP funds, this is the infrastructure category of the ARP funds. It's the easiest category to say, yeah, there's a project eligible there, and there's no question that this project would be eligible for the use of those funds. Even the roads, because you're doing so much work on the sewer and tearing up so much of the roads to do the sewer work, I think the road replacement would be covered under that federal funding as well. So when I look at the ARP funds, I want to do projects that are clear, are eligible for those funds, and maybe some that aren't so murky that somebody might question them, and we might have to pay back funds later. And this one's definitely clear that it could be used on those funds. We had been setting aside about $500,000 a year towards this project, primarily from additional personal property tax reimbursement revenue that we'd been getting from the state over our 100% reimbursement. And last year, when we found that these ARP funds were coming down, we sort of diverted those funds into the capital project fund. So right now, the only funds we have tied to this project are $500,000, and I believe it's in the local street fund that was sent there from the general fund. So that's the only funds that have been dedicated specifically for this project, but we do have some other funds that we have set aside in the capital project fund that could now be used for other projects, like, for example, the park project we talked about previously, or other road projects, or just any capital project, really. So by using these ARP funds, you're freeing up funds, and basically, we wouldn't be able to do this project without issuing debt. So you're also stopping us from having to issue additional debt to do this project as well.
Thank you. Excuse me. It's the redirecting, opportunity that presents it for all the other projects we've talked about. I'll stop. See if there's any questions. John.
This one's mainly targeted to Barry. How much money can we squeak out of the wastewater fund for this project?
You want me to take that one?
5 million.
Yeah, I mean, we have some money budgeted there already for this project, I believe, but I can't tell you right now how much we could squeak out of there. It's something we'd have to look at a little closer.
Okay.
That's a good question. I think as we move along with this, knowing if the rescue funds are there, how we then determine what that other amount is and where we can put them to good use with all the numerous projects we've talked about over the past several months. Other questions for Patrick? Andrew?
Yeah, I just, sort of a comment and a question. I know we're talking about ARPA funds now. I certainly think that this project, we were intending to do it anyway. It was on the docket to be done one way or another, and I think that it should be. And I think that, using ARPA funds for this project is entirely reasonable. I don't have an issue with that. My contention isn't with this particular project, but more the conversation that we're having surrounding ARPA funds generally. It's not an inexhaustible sum of money.
Right.
And I know that we've talked about other projects that may or may not be eligible, that, the funds could be spent towards. I just want to make sure that as we begin engaging, as those dollars begin to get allocated, that we sort of have an overall view of where we want to, what baskets we want to, put that in. Over the last couple of weeks since we heard, the amounts that were coming down and the potential projects that were put forward, I think we've potentially dedicated 2.5 times our ARPA fund allotment. We can't spend these dollars 4 times. So I just want to make sure that it's not a knee-jerk reaction every time we have a CIP project that was like, hey, we could do ARPA money towards that project. It's like, yes, we can, but we just need to make sure that we have a broader view. And so I'm sort of wondering when that conversation is going to occur, and when our plan on where to allocate those funds and what baskets to put them in is when that's going to be solidified somewhat.
Sure, it's a good question. I know that at our last meeting, Mr. Pastu said that I was going to set up some dates. We'll get some dates here toward the end of the month that we think we can meet, whether that's an evening, an extra meeting of the month, or a Saturday, which we've done many times and works well to get that. And I think that's the primary and only discussion I think we're having next would be regarding these overview of all the funds, knowing this was a significant one. But I think I'm sure as many of the council members, there's residents say, how about this, how about that? And then some qualify and some don't. And I think getting that conversation completed puts those priority opportunities, we have many, which could be used, and how we then prioritize it, so and the residents get that message too. So I appreciate it though. Michelle?
If we use those funds, Patrick, for this project, the millage funds we could use later on more projects in the future.
That would be correct, Councilwoman. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say that in my closing remarks, is that the $2.3 million on streets there is more than 1 year's allocation of the street millage.
So we can get more done.
You basically be adding a year's worth of projects in short order
I'll make sure I'm thinking
by
correctly.
using them here.
Okay.
And streets are not clearly eligible through the ARPA as a standalone. They have to be associated with a utility project. So this would be our one opportunity. If you are going to accelerate streets a little bit more, this would be a great way to do it, because it's essentially getting me a free year.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm thinking correctly. Great.
No,
Thank
sure.
you.
No, it's
Great.
certainly it's up to the council how you wish to allocate those funds, but we've been talking about this project for going on 7 years now, and I think
Yeah.
my job would be to advocate for it, I think, at this point.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, I'm looking to see if there's, Paula?
I just have one question about Maple and those streets over there that flooded during that, I don't know if it was the latest storm, but a lot of people had water in their basements. And is there any plan in the future? Is it something that the city needs to do, or do the homeowners need to do it?
Well, I'd have to look into specific cases. I'm not aware that we have wholesale problems in road drainage or storm sewer adequacy, so I think it's the same type of situation, except that in some of those neighborhoods, there are a lot greater options for the residents themselves can probably, in a lot of cases, make connections to the storm sewer with their clear water fixtures. Maple's kind of a mixed bag, but I appreciate the comments, probably beyond the scope of what we can get into here, and I've had a couple of questions from people on Maple as well, but a lot of it's the same theme. You've got older homes, and in a lot of cases, the sanitary sewers. You have floor drains that feed the sanitary sewers, so when there's any kind of backup, it goes into there, and then when there's footer tile, anything, roof drains that inadvertently or knowingly get into the sanitary sewer, it surcharges the whole thing and starts filling up basements. So this neighborhood's the absolute worst case of all the above. I even mentioned that there's tri-levels in here too, which makes it even worse because you've got living space on that lower floor. So similar issues in other areas of the city, but this is by far the most concentrated. So.
It's a good question. I think that we've had the conversation with the disconnect programs that we have and through water and wastewater, that there's programs which the residents could sign up for and we could mitigate sooner than before it happens again. So, and I know that those messages have gone out since the last, if not before. John?
Yeah, one question, Patrick, for the storm sewer there at St. Mary's. What's the storm event? What was it designed for?
Well, we talked about this before too. The 10-year design is the design storm, but it's the revised 10-year, and the Spicer Group is like at the forefront of all this. I haven't seen the revised number, but they've revised the 10-year storm upward. The most recent design manual, they've designed it to reflect, I'll say, the climate change conditions, if you will. So the 10-year storm we're designing to is like 50% more intense than the old 10-year, if you will. So it's probably somewhere between an old 10 and an old 25. Getting much bigger than that, you were still talking about pipe sizes that were starting to get absurd. So this will not absolutely eliminate any chance of street flooding, but by providing everyone an outlet and everyone a place to put their clear water fixtures, what it'll mean is if you do get surcharging in the street, that's not automatically going to result in surcharging through all your clear water fixtures and back in your basements. That's the idea. So, but it's a very good question, and I know we've been around and around on that. We did a 10-year report, and then they said size it for a 25. Let's look at the differences there, and this is just one of those areas I'm afraid that probably should have had 4 or 5 feet of fill brought in before it was ever built on. So we're working against a lot of things there. We're already going to be pretty much on rock when we lay these larger pipes here. So you start to get a little more prohibitively expensive. You're getting into some elliptical pipes to get to a much bigger design, and then you're getting special order stuff. You could be adding $2 or $3 million onto it. But it's a very good question, and I don't have one singular answer to it. But basically, it's at a minimum a 10-year storm design, but it's a revised upward to reflect the last 20 years worth of data.
So Patrick, just for clarity, because I know Clerk Lavoie and earlier today we were discussing this, we always say St. Mary's Gardens, but it's not St. Mary's Street. And I think your one slide had the streets that were what this area was named by Platt, or named was St. Mary's Gardens.
Mary's Gardens Platt.
Just so we're clear for the residents that may think one or the other, and it's really helpful. And of course, your slide has all the streets when you have Calgary and McCormick, the north end of Lavender, and
Rosler and John L.
John L. Thanks. So just want to refer to that. So I guess moving forward, I know looking at Mr. Sell, you're looking at making sure that I don't hear anybody that doesn't think this is a kind of a project to get on the track as soon as possible. We've talked about it before, and also any difference of opinions regarding the funding. Councilman Feller's point to take back, of course, is we still want to need to get our meeting and talk about the overall expenditures on rescue funds, but this was, as Mr. Sell said, is what they're designed for. So
Yeah, I mean, Patrick, maybe you could just say, I mean, if the council's ready to go forward with this, what's our next step?
Next step is I'm going to present to you the Spicer Group's design proposal. That is something Ed and I will, the finance director and I will talk about, because if we're going to use federal funds for this, there's federal procurement requirements. So the design contract may need to include city funds, because we won't have, otherwise we're backing up going through a broader professional services selection. So there's a little bit of behind the scenes we'll have to work out, but my intention would be to get you a proposal from the Spicer Group no later than the October 4th meeting, which would then allow us to finish up the design plans and get a contract ready for bidding by the end of the year. So, okay, next item, number 3 here. All right, this one I'll go a little faster, even still. Just want to give you an update from tree damage. I've got some nice pictures along here, but basically, as you all know, this is sort of a more formal presentation than I did at the last meeting. Talking about the August 11th storm. I've already told you we had everybody we had available to us 14 Teamsters plus 3 retirees did clean up for 2 full weeks. And then the residential sweep went really well between the 23rd and 27th of August. It seems to be very well received. I don't think we have a lot left hanging out there, and everybody dragged it to the street when we needed them to. So, I want to give you an update on where we are, and it's changing constantly because our staff is continuing to refine numbers. But we estimate we're about 65 trees that we've already either felled during the storm or we've removed them. So those are the damaged trees. Those are things. I think 2/3 of that fell storm night, but some of it was so hard to track because you just had stuff all over the place. We've got about 15 to 20 more that were damaged enough that we're going to have to take the rest of it down. We're going to do that ourselves. It's good, and we like to have the residents giving us this information, but because obviously everybody's nervous about storm, we're getting a lot bigger number of calls coming in, people wanting us to assess their tree. And so what that's coming up with is we're outpacing our typical numbers there for a month. So we're continuing to get those and evaluating, and we're going out proactively too to ourselves and trying to see particularly those harder hit areas and say, all right, well, what didn't come down that's got major splits and things in it that just nobody's seen yet? My staff picked up more than 30 today alone that they need to add to the list. So just like the areas that were hardest hit, Godfrey, Borges, St. Mary's neighborhood, Michigan Avenue, those are some of the high points there as far as which ones are coming. We're finding the most damaged trees that need to come down, and that's because of the preponderance of the species that are in that. I'll get into that in a minute. Just giving you some rough numbers so you know where we're at, because I'm coming to a request here. We have 1 supervisor and 3 Teamsters assigned to the forestry division essentially full-time. Our budget's about $500,000. So that gives you an idea of what we spend. So that's about 2.5% of the city's general fund budget we spend on forestry activities as it is. We're responsible for over 11,000 trees in public areas, mostly on public rights-of-way. We do removals in the range of 200 to 300. Replants are approximately the same. We're trying to have the replants higher than the removals. And we attempt to trim about 1,000, so we get at least 10% a year when possible. We usually have to end up assigning our heavy equipment operators in good winters to help us with that task. You can't see this spreadsheet very well, but I'll read off one of the rows there that's in red. This is our distribution from our last update on our tree inventory. And this tells you what species we have in. I can't even see this very well. Okay, this lost a little something in the translation there. But we had in 2020 about 5,000 maples. So that's 40-something% of our entire inventory. And breaking down those maples further, and we've made pretty good strides. We've gone from almost 1,500 to something north of 1,200 silver maples. But that was by far the species that had the most problems in this most recent event. And so we've been trying hard to diversify those. Obviously, we're not planting new silver maples, but those are ones that are a particular problem. Here's a nice picture, which I think you can see sort of a diagonal split in there. It's actually seeping water through there. That's clearly a tree that needs to come down. So that would be the type of tree that we're identifying as we're going through the neighborhoods now. A lot of times the silvers, they can appear healthy, but they're rotted from the inside. You can't always tell. So I don't want to assume they're all bad, but we're starting to lean that way after what we saw in the storm. We identified since the storm 104 additional trees that we've identified are necessary. 87 of those are silver maples. So that gives you an idea of the concerns there. Almost every single one on that list is 50 feet or taller and 30 inches in diameter or greater. So as I mentioned, we made strides, but 1,200 of those remain. I've mentioned this before, I'll say it again. I'm not presenting that to you tonight. Though, we need a strategic plan to phase those out in the near term, because how many more of these storms are we going to have? And my biggest fear is that even a night like tonight, if a front rolls through, how many of them were damaged that we can't see, that were weakened by the previous storms? And it just gets worse. It's not to say that any of them in particular are hazardous, but we need to start looking at that. You'll notice I have pictures of everything. I have tons of pictures of different locations where things fell down. I mentioned this at the last meeting. We have workload challenges at this point. We have assigned our operations crew to help with forestry for the better part of 2.5 weeks. We're trying to get back on schedule with everybody else. But that number at 67 plus, that was the old number. I changed this slide about an hour before I came in here to reflect new data. But even at 67, which it was before today, we can probably take down 6 to 8 of those large maples a day, or a week, I mean. sometimes one, sometimes two. We usually have a good day, we'll get 2 of them down. Just with the 67 we knew about before I changed the slideshow, we were already going to be out to Thanksgiving, just doing removals of the large silver maples primarily that were damaged in the storm but didn't come down. That assumes we don't do any other trimming and any other planting. And then, of course, the citizens are continuing to give us those, and we encourage that. We're not discouraging that at all, but we're just mentioning that that's something that's continuing to bring more in. And typically in November, we'll do our fall planting. That's our major planting for the year. We try to do 200 to 250 trees. So that should ideally be worked in the schedule somehow. That picture I took from the top of our wood chip pile, which didn't really exist a month ago. And that is the major parts of the trees that we took down. The vast majority of that photo is brand new since the start of August. So that tells you how much we've added. That's just what we brought down to the yard. The wood chip pile I'm standing on is probably 25 feet tall. And so we've got quite a few wood chips that we've already chipped up. What we're bringing to you, and we're prepared to move ahead with this, is we would like to contract out for at least 40 to 50 removals, so that we can at least have some hope of getting back on schedule. We don't really know what it's going to cost on a large contract like that, but 2,000 to 2,500 is probably not an unreasonable number. That would get you 40 to 50 trees. That's still only half our backlog as of today. But even that would be a $100,000 budget commitment. So I'm not going to stand here and say I need $500,000 or something. But we want to try to make a dent in that. Otherwise, we're going to get so chronically behind that we're going to be 60, 90, 120 days out on the new requests that come in from citizens, and that's not the service level we want to provide. We'll still handle the 15 to 20 that were damaged in the storm, plus any leftovers that we can't get by contract. Any new items in the queue, we'll finish the stump grinding, we'll do our trimming, but we're going to be really challenged. The second part of that is I would like to request that we're going to scale down our fall planting, maybe do like 100, and we're going to focus on the ones that the residents have been waiting a year or more, and where we can do a single tree in a single location. And the reason is twofold. One, we don't want to keep the residents waiting any longer than we need to, but also we know there's going to be areas where we're going to continue to take more down, and those are unfortunately in some of the same neighborhoods. So with 10 or 12 vacant spaces on a street, we think we can do more comprehensive planning. We can get a vision for that street rather than just surgically one here, one there like we would in some other neighborhoods. And then we would do our larger planting in the spring after we've got everything down from this event. Could be up to even 300. We will probably come to you for a budget amendment to purchase more trees than we had budgeted for in the spring. I'll deal with that when it comes, once we have a better number. So I'm basically just looking for council concurrence that you're okay with us soliciting a contract, which could be in the $100,000 range, to help us get back on track and then scale down our fall planting program.
Thanks, Patrick. I mean, we've talked about trees here for a while now, both in different terms, and this is about the devastation and the removal. And I'll look to Mr. Sell, because I know that part of this is the funding that may have to be in the contracting, and the other part is about the discussion the council's had of putting together that comprehensive plan, as you mentioned. I know Councilman Kalani just mentioned, others have as well, of getting those together that will look at this in a long-term plan. And if we are lessening the planting here in the fall, for I think good reason, the fact is we have so many that have to be removed, as long as we're in the process of moving forward, what we're going to get and how we're going to get come the spring, and can we manage that number of plantings. I'm kind of looking at both Patrick and Ed. I just, I guess one's the funding, but also it's the time and personnel, because we're being asked to support that removal that needs to occur before we do all the planting. Otherwise, we're planting and the removal still have to occur. If you don't have it, he's just nodding his head yes. So I know, John, you have a question, so I'll Ed.
Would this, the tree planting, would that be ARPA eligible?
The only category that could possibly fall into is the revenue loss category. And under that category, you're supposed to be using the money to provide direct services to the citizens. So I'd have a hard time seeing, especially maybe the replacement, but that's something I think we need to talk to Treasury about and get their opinion on, honestly. But at this point, I'd say no, but that's something we can talk to them and ask them about. But I'd go on with, just with Patrick's requests. There's a couple different buckets of money that we can look at to fund these. I think they're in the process of putting a list together of where those 40 to 50 trees are, and we could use street fund money on them because they are in the streets. We could use general fund money, obviously. So those are probably the two primary sources, but I think it's fundable one way or another.
So, oh, John, go ahead.
Another question is, and this is, I'm glad this slide is up. The one question I get, and I get photographs too from residents, is when the trees are replanted, people take pictures and they go, why are the trees so small? I mean, why aren't we planting like 2.5 inch caliper when we replace instead of these really small, thin trees? I get pictures from residents, especially residents where there's trees that have been taken down, like over in St. Mary's and Borges. I had a couple of residents that taken pictures they took down a beautiful tree, obviously storm damage, but then they replace it with a little tree that's that big around. Why aren't we putting higher caliper trees in?
Well, I'd have to go back and look at last fall's request. We were starting to think about pulling together this year's list when the storm hit, and here, so obviously that took a back seat. But I don't recall that we planted anything under 2 inches last fall. And I know we sought out trying to get bigger ones whenever we could. With the challenge, and I know Councilman, you and I have had some discussions about this, is that our forester is concerned a bit. When we start to get much above 3 inches, it's a combination of being able to get good selection with those. And just space. You get the bigger the root ball, the more. I mean, we don't have a lot of room. I mean, we have a maximum 10-foot terrace for the most part, and so you get into the point where just to fit it in that space, you have to cut enough of the roots that it stunts the growth for a year or two. And so usually a 2.5 or 3 inch tree is going to catch up to that 4 inch in our planting spaces. Normally, if you had a park and you had plenty of room, that's not true. But so I know that's part of the concern of why we don't go super big. I can't answer how many we would have planted in recent years under 2 inches. I don't believe I brought anything to council last fall that was under 2 inches, but I'd have to check my.
And then the other question is, because we have so many to plant, does it make sense to put that out for bid and have a private contractor come in and plant them rather than the forestry department doing it?
We talked about that as well too. That's something that we feel we do pretty efficiently is the tree planting. It's just it's sort of the sum total of everything we're dealing with right now. I mean, we've probably got 2 or 3 times as much work as we can reasonably handle, and I just can't afford to have the ops crew helping forestry anymore. So, yeah, I mean, in theory, we could lock, stock, and barrel ship that out. But right now, part of it's a function of just getting organized enough to know where we're going to put 200 or 250, because we've got some that we're going to be infill in St. Mary's, Borges, and Godfrey that now have a tree that came down next to it. And so those were some of the locations. It's just sort of, I don't want to say my department's disorganized. That's not a fair statement. But this storm has created a situation where we have so many moving parts that I would rather take a step back, get the ones that we know are infill, that are away from the areas where we've had damage, do this again in the spring. And we know we're going to have to bring in seasonals and gator bags and things and keep them watered a little better than we normally would if we plant them in the fall. But it's a valid point. I mean, if we're contracting out removals, we could contract out the planting as well. Either one is fair game, but I think from a liability standpoint, that's why we were more focused on getting the contracting out and getting the worst ones off the street as quickly as we possibly could. So we think we haven't really looked into whether we could contract out planting this fall or not, whether there'd be availability with any contractors, but it's something to consider. But I think we think we can do a limited planting program this fall.
So, Councilman, I think your point's well taken. Is we're looking at potentially work internal and contracts with one portion. Maybe that's a combination that we do in the planting. We have I know other staff that are assisting, not necessarily just there, but in the GIS. I mean, you talk about what's the space of the terrace in one street versus another. If it's one of those really very small ones, it's only going to be able to manage a particular size to start with, and unfortunately, they're going to be smaller. But I think there's others that may have a larger terrace. They would say, okay, that's where we can accelerate the size in which we're purchasing to move it forward without, you don't want to put a tree that's not going to survive because we cut back too much. But I think it goes part of the conversations we had before as well. So I think there are moving parts. I think, as you have here, obviously, contracting for removal of trees, we need to get them out for safe reasons and other reasons, and winter's coming. There's a budget transfer to that, and of course, looking at council, if there's issues, of course, we'll have to get that back where it comes from. That's what Mr. Sell does for us. And then really trying to find what we think if we're going to have to do some limited fall planting, then we have to look that we have a much larger spring planting. And I think that's what we need to get back. What's that number and what's those locations? It just, everything's moving. And of course, ARPA came up again here in this conversation, which we cannot, but the answer was good. I think in that respect is probably not, but we still have to have that meeting. Yeah, we can't keep pushing that down there. So, but that'll be a conversation with the city manager after tonight's meeting about looking at those dates and setting that out for our calendars to get that as the priority discussion, because it just ties to many things. Other comments on this?
The only thing I was going to say on the spring planting is that might be a good, like where we have a larger contract. That 250 or 300 tree in the spring planting would be a pretty big, beefy contract. That it might make more sense to contract it in spring than it would this fall, where we're just trying to keep the residents at bay that have waited a long time. I apologize.
When you said 300 in the spring, you would possibly contract that.
Yeah. Right.
That's a very valid course of action in the spring, I suspect.
And we have the residents that have been on the list and waiting. Obviously, this is a unexpected delay, and I think it's understandably why, that we could still get those, as many as those possible, and that those that are on that waiting list. Andrew?
I just wanted to comment to Director Lewis's request that I do support the additional allocation. I think it's necessary. It is unfortunate that because it comes out of the same pool of money, our ability to respond to the down trees and remove them is coming out of the same pool of money that our ability to replant them does as well. And so obviously, because of the events that happen that were unforeseen, storms happen. Sometimes you have rainy days, and it was pouring pretty hard that one. So I think that there's some additional funds. I think that that's something that's important to our community and Michigan broadly. So I think it's worth the expense. So I just wanted to offer my support.
I appreciate it. Yep. Thank you.
I know there's a couple more on the list here, so I definitely would like to get through the next one for sure and see where we go.
Yep, I'm gonna fly through this one here, and this is basically, we met, just to give you a brief overview, we met with city manager and I had talked about scoping a project for the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Footbridge that connects St. Mary's Park with the parking lot to the south. Just a little bit of background, it was built in 1988, prefab structure with wood plank decking. We've got that interior chain link fence that I think a lot of people don't like looking at. We've had various lighting schemes over the years, and currently we have overhead lights from the north. So we're working we picked Fishbeck to engage because they had been our bridge designers on 3 of the 4 bridge projects here, our major street bridges, Winchester, Rosler. They did not do Macomb, they did the other 3 projects on those 2 bridges. So I think very highly of them, and I think we got a good relationship with them that they could come up with some good solutions to this. These are a few more items than the city manager put in the fact sheet, but I threw 8 up there just as different items we could consider. I got kind of pictures of each one. Stairway repairs, and I'll show you pictures of those. Chain link fence replacement, painting of the entire structure, getting rid of the unused conduit, and then equipment replacement. So if you wanted to do different lighting options, we could look at some different lighting options. Replace the wood decking, railings and other concrete, just kind of spot work as we need them. I don't think there's a wholesale replacement. We looked at the steps at St. Mary's Park and then any other ramp work if we need ADA compliance issues, because there were some questions 20 years ago in our ADA lawsuit that the ramp may not be fully compliant, but they signed off on it for the time being. So I just have a few pictures to show you of what we've got there. The upper left is this crumbling staircase. We've got that closed for right now. Upper right is the chain link fence you can see, and that's some kind of protective barriers needed. So we're looking at options to have some supplemental rails so a kid can't fall through, for example. Looking at painting the structure, you can see in the bottom left, that's what it looks like. Unused conduit, you can't see that picture very well, but there's some old tube lighting that kind of wraps around, and that was an old system that's kind of obsolete, and it's been more or less removed. The wood decking is generally in acceptable condition. You've got some splits, you've got some separation in there, but we obviously do that at the same time. There's a couple places, and again, I apologize, you can't see this as well here as you can on my screen, where you've got some crumbling concrete near the railings. We do some spot repairs there. The lower left is the steps that come up from St. Mary's parking lot up to the ramp there. You can see it's a wood, it's got wood framing around it and asphalt between, which is a strange detail I've never seen. We'd be looking at doing something there in all likelihood. And then I just show kind of a generic picture of the approaches there to look at the ADA ramps leading up to it. We're really just looking to put this in front of you and say, does that scope seem reasonable? Are you okay with us proceeding to get a proposal scope from Fishbeck to, wouldn't be a design yet, it would be basically review cost estimation of the different options, almost like a design report, and then we'd come up with a proposal for funding through the CIP for 22-23. And then we'd obviously present that design proposal to the city council once Fishbeck prepared it. I would like to, we could do a competitive services proposal here. I think the dollars we're talking about aren't going to be very high. And I would recommend that you allow me to work with Fishbeck, given our previous very positive relationship and the successful completion of those 3 bridge projects in the past. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm gonna look at Mr. Sell, because I know this came up in the conversation about, obviously, there's always the funding, back to the funding and where it's coming. And our recent street millage also had for sidewalks and also trails. And we're gonna look, I guess, we don't have an answer, I think, right now, but that, is it something that would be, because it does connect our pathways and stuff. So if not there, I know Mr. Sell will tell us where else the funding may be, and once we learn about this. So I'm looking to see thoughts from the council, obviously, at least a consensus of scope and any additions you may or thoughts. I will say this, I know the DDA and others have talked about, remember the lighting that was on there, it really didn't last long. It's quite dated when it was put on, so there's much better technology today that would probably light the bridge well if we decide to do that. I know the DDA has also talked about that as far as being a project they'd be supportive of. So those type of thoughts, and then and if there's any concerns with staying with Fishbeck to move forward at this point.
And Mayor, if I could, on the lighting issue too, I don't know the street name, but it's, Fishbeck did do the design on one of the bridges in Grand Rapids that has, I think it's changeable colors. They've got some kind of unique design on that one. So I remember in their initial proposal for us, they had listed that as one of their bridge projects. So I know they do have that capability. So I wanted to point that out while we were talking.
So the DDA receives some information about what you see in some communities where they're doing the under bridge lighting for reasons, and it looks well, but the members of the board said, well, why aren't we looking at the top first about the bridge and moving over and tying the park, of course, to the south side of the river, and then other options there may be. So that's kind of that conversation is going on in that arena as well. Any thoughts, concerns? Bring something back? Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
If you want the last item, I'll give you the
No.
last item. That one's, there may be more discussion, but
I think there'll be more discussion on that. I think it's probably something we should probably.
I'll just introduce the topic for you. This was in your packet.
This is coming then.
Yeah. Do you want me to
We've
stop?
asked for it, so it's coming.
Anyway, that's basically what we'd asked RSNH as our standing airports consultant. We said, in response to discussion at the council level, nothing official, but and then also our desire to look at that hangar. It was the old sheriff's hangar, essentially looking at some type of reuse. What can we do with it? What are some options? And then we asked them at the same time, could you prepare a scoping for looking at doing a brief survey and analysis of our existing T hangars? Are we charging the right amount of rent? What should we be setting aside for a capital reserve? That types of thing. So I gave you a copy of their preliminary scope. That was actually in the agenda packets. So here's an area map if you want to see it, but that was what we'd be looking for is, barring any concerns, we'll get them to put a price on it and bring it back in front of council. It would have to be done with city funds because they consider that, aeronautics considers that potentially revenue generating property. And so I asked about it, they didn't want to fund this level at least.
So at this point, what's being presented regarding the airport hangar study about getting a kind of a scoping proposal, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Thoughts from council members on this? I know we had some conversations briefly about it. There's a whole bigger discussion to be had about what do we use with the airport? What is the priorities? What will we have for hangar space? Should we be looking into things that should be added? This is the hangar. John, go ahead.
Yeah, my question when I reviewed the information is, are we going to take a look at the terminal?
Well, that would be part of this. This would be creating from the sheriff's hangar building. There, at present, there's old classroom space in there. There's plumbing connections for restrooms, and there's also room. You could have like an FBO operate out of there too, but that would be the intention, that this building would serve as the terminal building. Right now, we have an office in the bay hangar, and nobody seems to believe that we've got adequate space in the existing bay hangar to have a true terminal use building. So this would be looking at 3 or 4 different options to potentially create that in the sheriff's hangar building.
So you're going to create the terminal in another hangar?
That would be the first hangar there as you come to on the road.
Okay. I mean, there's no thought about, like other small municipal airports, of building a new terminal.
Well, we hadn't gotten there yet. We wanted to see what we could do with the existing building first and what the kind of costs we had. And that's why I wanted to bring this in front of council. If council wants us to go bigger, we can do that. But this was we thought, a first step of seeing what we could accommodate with the existing facility we had, what options that would give us.
So I guess that question, as John brings up, is, here's the structure we have. Is it even feasible? And what would that be? And I don't want to say complete proposal what a new terminal is, but what's the difference? I mean, I don't know what a new terminal is, the size it would be for this type of an airport. Maybe there's just some general facts about that. That would be something at least to compare to. You could do this with what you have. What would be, if they're talking a new facility, this would be the basic square footage you would need. This is the reason to what would be done, and where would it potentially go in this site?
Yeah.
When you look at that map.
That's why I wanted to bring this in front of you, to make sure we've got this scoped right. If the council's collective decision is you'd like us to look bigger, scope bigger, we can certainly do that. But before we got the price finalized and me bringing this to you as an action item, I wanted to get thoughts. So you don't necessarily, I know we're running out of time, so if you want to give me thoughts offline, we can certainly continue to do that.
No?
I'd rather,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd rather look a little bit bigger. I mean, take a look at the Port of Monroe template. They invested in new facilities and they engaged in marketing, and look what's happening out there. And this has always kind of been the stepchild. I mean, very few communities our size have an airport.
Right.
And the terminal building out there is terrible compared to smaller communities in Monroe.
Well, we don't even have it open.
No, I know.
Yeah.
It's
Basically
What you're talking about, where's the port? And I see a relationship there.
microwave in
That's
the
it.
back area. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think that it would sort of be silly to try and go out and do a study for just this portion, and then the first thing we do is turn around and be like, well, okay, now how do we expand? What's that project cost, and what's the potential for generating revenue and operating in the black from now on? Why is it a two-phase thing? Why not just include it now? I'm with John, bigger scope.
And I'd be interested in knowing what that space is, and I don't have an understanding. I may could go to small airports and see, but I still wouldn't.
Yeah.
What would it take, and where would it fit in what we have?
I think we're talking about a broader conversation, so I mean, in interest of not rushing things along,
We may not be moving forward.
we may need to have some further discussions on this.
I agree, and I think some of the problems that were caused before with the airport were that the residents did not want the traffic,
Right.
the business traffic that was coming in, the jets, whatnot. And I think that was some of the problems that were caused by having a larger perspective on this. But I'm definitely for it, for sure.
The airport needs to pull its own weight, ideally,
Correct.
and right now it is not financially. It's not a huge albatross, but it's not making money.
It could thrive greater than what is currently utilized.
I think we can do better.
I think maybe we should continue this conversation, Mayor. I don't, but any comments you'd like to make or thoughts on scope of a future study on this, send it along to the city manager and I. We'd be more than happy to elaborate and continue this scope refinement.
Well, you got through the list, Mr. Sell. Any
right.
final comments or thoughts? Anything you need
Nothing
to?
else for me.
Last comments for council. Well, those we have a few minutes before we can get ready for the council meeting. Seeing none this time. We'll close the work session, and we have about 6 minutes before the regular meeting. Thank you, Mr. Lewis.